Today our topic of discussion is support vector machine. So initially support vector machine, it was developed in 1960s and later they were found again in 1990s and they become popular for machine learning applications for its powerful features. Now we will try to identify all those features of support vector machine. So here if you look at this graph, you will find some points in 2D space. So some of them are red and some of them are green. Now here the point is how to define a line that is going to separate these points. And that separation, on other words, you can say that it is known as decision boundary. So basically today our objective is to find out some appropriate decision boundary either by dividing those points in this manner with a single line or with diagonal lines, vertical or horizontal lines. These are the mechanism that we could follow. So this is our main intention. So for that purpose, we will use the concept of support vector machine. So here, look at this picture. It is a very important concept. So here my point is, SVM tries to find the best line or the best decision boundary that separates a given space into classes. But here I want to tell you one point. Whatever discussion I am performing, it seems like that SVM is applicable only for classification. But this is not the concept. SVM can also be applied for regression. But today we are talking about classification only. So here, if you look at this picture, you will find that we have one line which is separating these two classes. And here at the same time I am getting a maximum margin, that is the line drawn from some point which is equidistant from this point. Look at here. So we have 2 points over here and this line is drawn from the equidistance from these 2 points. Right? So this line is known as maximum margin. And what are these 2 points? These 2 points are basically known as support vectors. Now the question is why? Since these 2 points are supporting the whole algorithm, means by using this 2 point and their distance from this maximum margin, we are separating these two classes. So these 2 points are known as supporting vectors. That is, these 2 points are supporting the entire algorithm. Means these points will not contribute anything in this algorithm. So we may have many number of supporting points, but here we have 2 supporting points drawn from this maximum margin, equidistance from this margin, and these are known as support vectors. Now here the concept is why they are known as vectors. So in multi-dimensional space, when we have just more than 2 variables like 3, 5, 10 or 100 variables, each one of them are points. But you cannot visualize them in 3D space. So all of these points are considered as vectors in multi-dimensional space. So whenever we are plotting some points in multi-dimensional space, visualizing them become very difficult. Then at this point of time, we will consider them as vectors. So this point you have to remember. So here, this is a general term that I am using. So points are also known as vectors. Now, the line in this middle is called maximum margin. I have explained that. But it is also known as hyperplane, or it is also known as maximum margin classifier. Now we have to understand this concept. In 2D space, it is classifier. However, in multi-dimensional space, it is known as hyperplane. This line is known as hyperplane. Why? I will explain it in the next slides. Now, in the green side, we have a line. This line, it is a positive hyperplane. And in the red side, we have this line. It is a negative hyperplane. However, it does not really matter in which order you name them. You can name it as negative hyperplane or you can name it as positive hyperplane. It is according to your choice. So here my point is, try to understand whenever you are going to design any support vector machine algorithm, first you have to find the support vectors, means the point, which are placed in equal distance or equidistance position from this maximum margin. Maximum margin means the line which classifies these points. Afterwards, you have to mark the positive and the negative hyperplanes. So these are the main concept of this support vectors. Now we have some more concept about this support vector machine, which is very, very important. Now here, first we have to understand what is so special about this SVM algorithm. Why it is different from other algorithms. Say we are trying to distinguish between two specific fruit, apple and orange. Now how to classify these fruits? So you give some data of apple and orange and analyze them and look at them and see what parameters they have. Then I will give either apple or orange to the machine and it has to tell me whether it is apple or orange. So this is a standard machine learning algorithm. But now you have to understand, in case of SVM, whenever SVM tries to classify, what it will do. So basically SVM does what? It will not consider these cases. So try to understand what is the problem. Say we have apples and we have orange over here. So in general algorithms, look at the most standard apples, means which exactly look like apples, or it will look like more standard oranges in general machine learning algorithms. So what will happen? It will get some points like this. But these classes are very far away from each other. So in this case, this kind of classification pattern will not be followed by SVM. So SVM does what? It will try to learn from the apple which are not look like apple. Means try to understand from here, SVM algorithm will pick one apple which almost look like an orange, like this. And also SVM will pick from this class an orange which almost look like an apple. So these two things will be considered as support vectors. And they are at this point of time will be very close to the boundary. So therefore, SVM is very risky type of algorithm because it looks as very extreme cases which are very close to the boundary and uses this concept to construct its own analysis. So at this point of time, this is the basic difference between support vector machine algorithm and non-support vector machine algorithms. So now what is my intention? Because at the beginning of the class, I have explained that in case of support vector machine, whenever we have two classes, then it will pick some support vectors or some points which are very close to the margin. So how these points are achieved, this is the most important point, because SVM will not learn from the typical data pattern. It will pick up one pattern which is unusual. So in this case, consider this pattern as this one, and in this case, consider this pattern as this one. So this is the basic concept which is completely different from other machine learning algorithm that can be employed for classification. We have some more discussion regarding this SVM. Now consider a situation. So I was talking about this, means whenever we have two classes and here we are dividing those classes by a single line. So this kind of situation is known as linearly separable situation where we have a boundary which is a straight line. Now here consider this situation where these data points cannot be separated by any single line. Horizontal, vertical, diagonal, we cannot separate them. So in this case, these are known as non-linearly separable data points. So now in this case, we have to understand how SVM will work. So now it is better first try to visualize some data points in the one-dimensional space, 1D space. So these are the data points. And by visualizing these data points, we can find out that we cannot separate them with any single line. So they are non-linearly separable. So what SVM will do, it will apply some specific kind of mapping function. So say here the mapping function f is equal to x minus 5. So what will happen? All those points, so this point will be shifted here. So we will have this kind of situation for this mapping function. Now here try to understand. Now SVM will try to find out any particular line that can separate them. So it is not possible. So again SVM will define another mapping function like f is equal to x minus 5 whole square. So in this case we will have this kind of situation. And if we pick up those points and plot them on this mapping function, now astonishingly you will find that they are linearly separable. So SVM applies some sort of mapping function for the data set which are non-linearly separable to classify them. But try to understand, can we apply this mechanism? No, here the problem is for using this kind of mapping function, it is computationally very expensive. So we will try to avoid them. So at this situation, what we will do means in the real life, whatever problem or data set we will get, they will be non-linearly separable. So at this point of time, we will try to define some mapping function and try to apply this SVM algorithm. So at this point of time, SVM will do what? So at this point of time, whenever we have non-linearly separable data points, we will use some sort of mapping function. Means what kind of mapping function we will use depends on the orientation of the data points. And then we will map them into higher dimensional space. Say we have our data points in 2D space, we will apply some mapping function and we will map them in some 3D space. So in the previous case, we have 1D data points and we have mapped them using some mapping function into some higher dimensional space. So this is the concept that SVM is using. And whenever we map our non-linearly separable data set into higher dimensional space, then we will get some hyperplane. So what is the concept of hyperplane? I have explained that whenever we have lower dimensional space, then we can divide them with a line. At this point of time, we can call them maximum classifier or the classifier line or the maximum margin. But whenever we move on to the higher dimensional or multi-dimensional spaces, so this line will be considered as hyperplane. So this hyperplane will act as a separator. So why it is important? Try to understand the process of this algorithm. First get the non-linearly separable data set, apply some mapping function, and then convert it into the higher dimensional space. So once you have got the hyperplane, now again project them back to the initial space. So initially it was in 2D space. So after finding the correct hyperplane, I am just projecting this back to the 2D space. So as a result, this hyperplane will look like this. So basically we are getting some separator for this non-linear dataset. So this is a simple process you have to understand. So whenever we have non-linearly separable dataset, first find out the mapping function and project them in the higher dimensional space. So here from 2D to 3D I am projecting, and then once the hyperplane is identified, then project them back to its initial position. Then easily you will get the hyperplane and they are classifying red from green dots. So here the problem is, we know that this kind of situation is very computationally expensive. And also we can say it is highly computation intensive also. So we need lots of computation over here. So therefore this approach is not the best one. So now to solve this kind of non-linearly separable classification, SVM will use a concept which is known as kernel trick. Now we will try to understand what is this kernel trick which is applied by this SVM algorithm. Say we have one equation like this. So what is this K? This K stands for kernel. And we have two values over here. Here say X signifies some data points and L, it is signifying some landmark. And now we are using this computation. So whenever I will use this kind of lines, then you will understand that we are talking about some distance. So basically I am finding a distance between a point and the landmark. And what is this factor? I will explain it later on. So first we have to understand what is the concept of landmark and how we are finding distance of a point from this landmark. So now let's consider this is a specific point, or you can say that it is a particular visualization plot. In this visualization plot, this one is at the middle of this 2D space, and the vertical axis depicts the calculated results by this formula. And we have every other points on this XY plane. Now let's start analyzing this. So what is this landmark? Now if you go to the top and if we come down over here, so this point, this red point is the landmark. Say we have created one landmark over here at the bottom of this plot. So landmark is the place from where we are measuring the distance. Now consider, say this is one point. And here I am finding out the distance. So this is the distance from the landmark. And this is the formula of calculating the distance. Now what we are doing over here? Here plus is the point. Now this distance from the point, say it is a large distance. So whenever we are computing the distance, then we are getting a large number at this point of time. And whenever dividing it by 2 by sigma square, then it is also a large number. So what we are getting over here at this situation? So since the distance of the point is large from the landmark, so this calculation is large. So we will get a value, means we are calculating over here e to the power minus a large number. It is something similar like e to the power 1 by 1000. So it is very small number and it is close to 0. So basically my point is, whenever a point is far away from the landmark, we will get a pretty much 0 value on the vertical axis. And consider we have another point, so this one, this green point. This green point is nearer to this landmark, means this distance is less. Since this distance is quite small, then what we are getting? We are getting power of e to the power of some small number, say minus 0.1. So e to the power minus is 0.1. So at this point of time, we are getting e to the power 0 basically. So e to the power 0 means we can say that it is 1. So when the distance is very small, then we are getting some sort of value which is at the top of this visualization. So this is the basic concept they are using. And this formula is known as radial basis kernel formula. Now, before explaining this formula, why it is important, we know that. So basically, we have to find out a landmark from which we will try to find out the distance of the points that we are going to classify using some different formulas. So here I am using radial basis function formula. However, we have to understand the concept of this sigma square. Why this concept is incorporated over here? This sigma square denotes this circumference of this visualization plot, and try to understand what it is depicting. So anything outside this circumference in the 2D plane, say they are the red points. We can assume them like this. So circumference will help us to separate two classes from each other. So in this case, we have red and green points. So sigma basically defines how wide the circumference is. So whenever we increase the sigma value, it will incorporate more points. And whenever we decrease the sigma value, means the circumference is decreasing, so it will incorporate less points. So here, finding appropriate sigma will help us to adjust the decision boundary. So we can extend this concept to some harder problem also. So try to understand. Say I am using kernel trick over here. So we have this kind of data distribution. So here we can use this kernel concept like this. So we are taking two kernel functions over here. I was discussing this kernel function in the previous cases. So say here I have taken two kernel functions. Two kernel function means I have two landmark. Now see, I want to explain one point, how to place this landmark. So we have some separate computations for that. I'm not going into that. But try to understand here, since data pattern is very complex. So here I am taking two kernel functions. So therefore we have two dots. Now what is our intention? We have to find out the distance of each and every point from this dot, as I have explained in the visualization part. So try to understand why we are taking the summation of this two kernel function. That is the important thing. Say, after computation, the landmark 1, here I am getting some value as 0. And after computation, from this landmark 2, I am getting value which is non-zero. But overall in this case, as I am taking the summation, I will get some non-zero value. So we get a non-linear decision boundary like this. So the ultimate aim of taking sum of two kernel function is to get some non-zero value. And whenever we are getting some non-zero value, it will help us to find out this kind of non-linear decision boundary. And in this case, we can say that the green values or green points will be whenever we have the summation of the kernel function we have greater than 0, and whenever it is equal to 0, it is considered as red points. So this is how this classification will work. So this is the very basic concept about SVM. Now, since we are working on Python, you don't have to worry about this calculation and computations. In Python, we will call the SVM function, and according to the problem, we have to try to visualize the data pattern, and accordingly, we will take this function. Means we can take linear function, we can take RBF function. So we have to just call this function. So now here what I am going to explain is that whatever may be the consideration or whatever may be the computation that SVM uses, while implementing this SVM algorithm, the first point is the data. So first you have to visualize the data, or you have to understand the data. Once you get a proper understanding with a proper data visualization, then you can identify what kind of kernel function we should use. And once you get the kernel function, you will get the proper decision boundary, and then automatically your data points will be classified. So now I'm giving you a very small example so that you could understand what we are going to do. We know that we are working on a repository that is known as UCI Machine Learning Repository. I have picked up one cancer dataset from this UCI repository. And the first point, whenever we have collected data from the repository, the first one is we have to visualize the dataset, or we have to analyze the dataset. So the first thing, we have to identify how many classes are there. So by viewing the metadata or the dataset description, I have identified that we have two specific types of classes for this dataset. One is known as malignant, which is known as harmful cancer, and second class is known as benign, which is not harmful. So these are the two types of classes we have in the dataset. Now, we have to find out the samples that I was talking about. In our case, we have red and green. So how many samples are there? So we have 212 samples for malignant type and 357 samples for benign type. But here in the data set, what is not mentioned, that they are not balanced. So you have to identify this. So they are unbalanced. Unbalanced means the number of data points present for each and every class category is not equal. And now we have to identify the samples. How many samples we are there means how many rows are there in the data set. So there are 569 samples. So we have 569 rows in our data set. Now let's talk about the dimensionality of the data set. So the dimensionality of the data set means 30. So basically, what do you mean by dimensionality? See, here 30 dimensionality means we have 30 features, means 30 column. All this column will contribute to find out the proper types of classes. So basically we are expecting that since the dimensionality is 30, means we have 30 features, means 30 column. And one extra column that signifies the class. So in our data set we have total 31 columns and 569 rows. And what are the 30 features? So it is mentioned over here. So we have the first column as mean radius, then mean texture, mean parameter, mean area. So all are the features that will define the cancerous cell. So these are the 30 features which are clearly mentioned over here. So the first thing, you have to do this kind of analysis on your data set. So whenever we write our SVM algorithm, our intention is to find out two separate classes so that we could get the maximum classification accuracy. Means all malignant category will be in one side and all benign category will be on other side. So this is our concept. So we know that we will use definitely the kernel trick, and what kind of kernel we will use, that you have to decide. So I will give you one link where you will find out how many types of kernels are there, what are the names of the kernels. You just put the name of the kernel in your code and then you will try to find out which kernel is giving you the better accuracy. But the most important point is you have to find out the formulation of that kernel trick, and it is available in the library. So I'm showing it to you. So I have created this code for you all and I have documented this code also. So try to understand what are the simple steps that we have to follow while writing the SVM algorithm. First, you have to import the data set. See, I am importing this data set from this library. However, you can download the dataset from an authentic repository, store them in the directory, and you can read them by using read CSV concept. And so here my point is, try to understand, we have so many datasets which are defined inside the sklearn, but try to understand this dataset is also available in the UCI machine learning. So you can directly download it. But here my point is, whenever we will do some research, we will not use this standard datasets, right? So we have to incorporate, or we have to download this dataset from other sources, because this SVM algorithm we can also use for image classification also. So at that point of time, I will download image dataset from some repository. So at that point of time, we will use read CSV concept. So what will be these two steps? It will be completely dependent on the application. Whatever may be the situation, the first case is you have to load the dataset in the current working directory. Then you have to explore the dataset. This is the most important point that you have to understand. How many features we are using. See, after writing this command, that is for exploring dataset, I am getting the entire features that I was talking about. How many features are there? And we can name them also. So we have 30 features, I guess. So we have 30 features in the dataset. And this is how your raw dataset will look like. I have downloaded it from the UCI machine learning. So these are the features we will have. See, we have one extra feature, that is ID. So in raw dataset, what will happen? There will be some column which is not useful. So here you have to drop this kind of extra column because it is not contributing anything in my classification. And these are the classes. So try to understand one point. Whenever we are talking about in our dataset, we have features and classes, it does not imply that the class level will be at the last column. So in this case, the second column is the class column. And how I have identified this? Because it is given in the metadata. So M for malignant and B for benign. So this is the important point you have to understand. So the class level column may be anywhere in the dataset, and you could only realize it by reading the metadata description properly. And we have rest of the features over here. So this is how your dataset will look like. So we have 30 features that I have explained. So now, after exploring the dataset, then you have to identify the class level. So if you use this column, then you will easily find out what are the specific two categories of classes are there in the dataset. So use this kind of command. It is very, very important. Now, the next step, now you have to find out the shape of the dataset that I was talking about. Dimensionality and also the sample, means the row and the column. So 569 is the row and 30 is the dimensionality. So these are the 30 features that is going to contribute in your code. So this is another important thing that you have to realize for any kind of dataset. So now we will start exploring the data set one by one. So here what I have done, it is clearly explained. So I am just checking the first top 5 records and what are the feature values. I am just checking that whether it is coming properly or not. So it is a completely optional thing that you may visualize or you may not visualize. So I am just doing this for the purpose of whether this file is read properly or not. So now here what we will do, we have to set the target. Target means the class level. So in this case, I am just changing the target, means in our case, whatever we have, our target is M and B. But in case of classification, it is better if you convert them into 0 and 1. So it will be better to classify them. So at this point of time, I'm just changing this target into 0s and 1s. And then we know that as we are working on supervised machine learning, so we have to split the dataset into two parts, in the training part and in the testing part. And also you have to remember what should be the split size we will follow some convention. So here I have taken 70% of the data as training data set and rest of the 30% data as testing data set. And you have to remember one point, the size of the training data set will be larger than the size of the testing data set. Because by using training data set, your algorithm is actually learning about your data set. And then we will test the algorithm with some small amount of data set. So you can take it as 80-20 or 90-10. So here I am using 70% and 30%. So after splitting, now here you have to generate the model. And generating model is very simple. I am using SVM model. So I am just importing SVM from sklearn and I am just using this function. Now here, what will be the kernel type that I was talking about? Here the kernel type is linear. Now you can change the kernel type and you will find the accuracy. So why I have taken this kernel type as linear, I will explain it to you. But this is the portion where you can change the type of the kernel. Now afterwards, you have to perform some evaluation so that you could find out the accuracy of the test dataset. So now here the accuracy is 0.9649. It is 96%. So I think whatever kernel I have taken, that is the linear one, it is working perfectly fine. So now after finding the accuracy, you can do this thing. This is the very, very important thing. Here we have got the classification accuracy almost 96.49%. So it is considered as very good accuracy, but for further evaluation, you can also check the precision and recall of the model. So this model precision is considered as this. So now we have to understand about this two factors. What is the precision of the model and what do you mean by the recall of the model? But here my point is, before explaining this, try to understand finding accuracy of your prediction is not the only thing that is used for the judgment of the proper classification. After getting the accuracy, see, if you get a very low accuracy, then there is no point of checking precision and recall. But whenever you are getting pretty much good accuracy, which is more than 90%, here we have 96%, then you check the precision and the recall of the algorithm with this codes. So then only your classification is done. So now I think the concept of this SVM is clear to you.